Welcome back, my cherubs, to subject-verb agreement. This is subject-verb agreement day 3. Today we're going to talk about the last group of indefinite pronouns. And those are the indefinite pronouns that can be singular or plural. They can be either singular or plural, depending on the context of the sentence. If you feel as though you need to, please stop the recording now and go back and review those singular indefinite pronouns, the ones, the bodies, the things, each, either, neither, another, and how we find the verbs, the simple predicates that go with those singular indefinite pronouns. You might also want to review the plural indefinite pronouns, both, few, many, several, and make sure that you can find how the simple predicate can be found for those. If you feel as though you need to, go back and review the initial day of indefinite pronouns. The initial day of subject-verb agreement, where we talked about the interrupters, because those interrupters, they can creep up with any other rule. And of course, please come to clinic if you are unsure of where we are now, because it's difficult to move forward as these skills layer. If you are ready, though, I am ready. And today we are going to talk about the singular or plural indefinite pronouns, those that can go either way. There are 5 of these indefinite pronouns. They're troublesome because we can't always say, they are singular, or they're plural, because they can go either way. They can be singular in one sentence and plural the next. That's the bad news. The good news is there are only 5 of them. Some, any, none, all, and most. If we put them together in an acronym, we end up with the SANAMs. The SANAMs. Some, any, none, all, most. When I ask you then, what are the indefinite pronouns that can be singular or plural, that can go either way, you're going to tell me the SANAMs. Some, any, none, all, most. Take a moment and pause the recording and say that in your head. I'd prefer it out loud 10 times. Memorize them. The indefinite pronouns that can be singular or plural, they can go either way, are the SANAMs. Some, any, none, all, most. Because of course you can expect me to ask you about them the next time we meet in class. So pause the recording and memorize. Welcome back. This is how we want to tackle then our SANAMs, those indefinite pronouns that can go either way. Normally, with our subject-verb agreement, we want to ignore and cross off the interrupters that might come between any subject and its simple predicate. We don't want to abandon that completely. But in order to execute subject-verb agreement with our SANAMs, we actually have to look within these interrupters. So we want to identify them, cross them off, but then pay attention to them. And here we see it says to figure out the verb, look at the noun within the prepositional phrase. And this is what I mean by that. We know we're used to crossing off the prepositional phrase that might come between the subject and its simple predicate. And when I talk about looking at the noun within the prepositional phrase, I'm talking about the prepositional phrase, or sometimes it's a single word that comes between the subject and its simple predicate. That prepositional phrase that we often cross off. And let's look at the first example to bring this into clarity. When we look at the first example, we might recognize that the subject is most of the garden. We want to recognize that this is one of our SANAMs. We can't immediately say that this word is singular or plural, most, because it's one of our SANAMs. It can go either way, and we're not sure yet. We do recognize that this is a prepositional phrase of the garden. And normally we do still want to kind of cross it off and ignore it, but this time we can't actually completely ignore it. We need to instead look at it. Look specifically at the noun within that prep phrase. And that noun within the prep phrase here is garden. So we recognize the prep phrase of the garden, but since this is a SANAM, most, we need to come back to that prep phrase, find the main noun, garden. And it is with this main noun that we agree our verb. The garden has been planted. So we would actually ignore the initial part of the sentence, most of the. And instead, we would make our verb has been agree with garden. Most of the garden has been planted. So when we find the synonyms, we need to look at the noun within the prep phrase that follows that synonym. The second one, most of the people have already seen that show. Our subject is most of the people. We want to cross off our prep phrase, but then say to ourselves, oh, here's the synonym. We don't immediately know what the synonym is because it can go either way, singular or plural. So we need to look at the noun within the prep phrase that has come between the subject and its simple predicate. Here, that prep phrase is of the people. We want to look at the noun, the core noun within that prep phrase, which is people, and have our verb agree with the people. The people have already seen that show. So the entire sentence reads, most of the people have already seen that show. Notice that in each of these two first examples, the synonym is most. But in this first example, the garden is singular. The garden has been planted. In the second example, the people is plural. The people have already seen that show. So the number of the verb we choose, has or have, is not contingent upon the synonym, because it can go either way, but instead contingent upon that main noun within that prep phrase that comes between the synonym and its simple predicate. So we must come back to that noun within the prep phrase. In the next examples, we see that both of the synonyms are all. All of the milk. We don't know what all is. Normally we cross the prep phrase off completely, but we need to look at that noun to tell us. The milk is sour. All of the milk is sour. The next example, all of the apples. Again, we don't know if all is singular or plural. We need to look within this prep phrase that we would normally cut out. The apples have been picked. And once again, the synonym is the same, but in the first example, we have the singular milk. The milk is sour. And in the second, we have the apples. It's plural. The apples have been picked. And we can continue with the next synonym, some. Some of the mail is opened. Ignore or cross off our prep phrase, but since we don't know what some is because it's one of our synonyms, we need to come back into the prep phrase. The mail is opened. Some of the branches. We want to cross off our prep phrase, but say, hey, the branches are broken. Some of the branches are broken. And we can continue with the other three synonyms as well. The next of which is most. Most of the food complaints. You tell me, what would you do? Do it now. That's right. Most is a synonym. We don't know if it's singular or plural. We would cross this off, but then say, whoop, hold the phone. We need to come back into the core noun, the food complaints. The food complaints are coming from seniors. How about this one? Most of the tabletop. What would you do? Do it now. That's right. We don't know what most is. It's a synonym. Normally we would cross this off. We got to come back, though, to the tabletop. The tabletop is tacky. And we see yet once again that though the synonym is the same, most, in this first example, the core noun in the prep phrase is food complaints. It's plural. The food complaints are. And in this one, the tabletop, our core noun, is singular. The tabletop is tacky. Go ahead and do these last two. That's right. Any is a synonym of the dogs. Got to come back to dogs. The dogs want. Any of the dogs wants to go outside. And then the last one, any of the dessert. Don't know what any is. The dessert is up for grabs. And so we have any again. The dogs is plural. The dogs want. We have any here. The dessert is singular. The dessert is. We might look at this one. Any of the dogs want to go outside. Whoops, I'm sorry about that. What's happening? Oh, it's just like being in class, isn't it? What's Miss DV doing? And there we go. Any of the dogs want to go outside. It sounds like an awkward sentence, and it might be. It might be a sentence that you don't hear very often. We can trust that it's right, though, because we followed the rule. I might use this in the context of, I don't know, being in a kennel with a bunch of the dogs, and I'm asking someone, could you please take a dog outside? And someone might say, well, which dog? I might say, well, any of the dogs want to go outside. Pick one of them and take him out. So it sounds awkward, but it will work as long as we follow the rule. Why don't you pause the recording now and try these several down below. We'll be back in a minute. Let's see how you did. I'm confident. Notice that each of these sentences begins with the synonym. That won't always be the case, but for our purposes, it usually will be. Often when we make mistakes with subject-verb agreement, it's because the subjects and the verb are embedded within a dependent clause in the middle of a sentence or a more complicated sentence. But as we first learn this skill, we want to make sure we understand the basics. These basics will take you a long way. Here we go. None of this. It's a synonym. Prep phrase. This is easy. Gosh, I hope it is at this point. None of this is easy. All of the syrup. We say, oh, there's a synonym. We don't know if it's singular or plural. There's that prep phrase. The syrup has leaked out of the refrigerator. All of the syrup has leaked out on the refrigerator shelf. Any students who wish to go to the park. We have two things happening here. First of all, there is no prep phrase that immediately follows that we see, but isn't it implied? Any of the students? It is. And we just take out the of the. So it is this core noun we're looking for. What's this over here? That's right. It's an extra interrupting clause. Don't let that extra interrupting clause throw us because the students need their boots. Any students who wish to go to the park need their boots. It's a tough one because of this extra interrupter. And because the prep phrase here is ellipted, we lose of the. Any students need their boots. In number 4, some ants in the anthill. The same situation here. Doesn't this mean some of the ants? In the anthill is an extra prepositional phrase that interrupts. Some ants want a new queen. There's been anarchy in the anthill. And lastly, most of the flour from the cookies. Well, we've got 2 prep phrases here, don't we? There's our synonym of the flour and from the cookies. So now you need to ask yourself, well, which prep phrase do you dip into? Well, what are we talking about? What has been absorbed by the batter? Is it the cookies that have been absorbed by the batter? No, it's the flour that has been absorbed by the batter. So we're truly going to ignore that one, and we're dipping into this one. The flour has been absorbed by the batter. And so that's the verb we're looking for. So sometimes you do have to throw in the common sense, like on this one. We're not talking about cookies being absorbed. We're talking about the flour being absorbed. So it's this core noun that we're looking at. Remember, when you return, be ready to tell me what the 5 synonyms are. Yes, there might be a quiz. See you soon.